You need to understand something, Kesha, Richard Thornton said sharply, pointing at her 2-year-old son. Kesha had worked as his housekeeper for 3 years, but Richard made it clear that his mansion was no daycare. This is my home, not a playground for your boy, he sneered. His tone dripped with contempt, and the way he said this boy made Kesha's blood boil. Still, she forced her face to stay calm. At 28, she had already learned that showing anger to wealthy white men would only bring more trouble. Her son, Devin, sat quietly on the kitchen floor, tapping plastic pots together, unaware of the bitterness in Richard's voice. Mr. Thornton, Kesha explained softly, my nanny got sick. I had no one else to watch Devin. This won't happen again. It better not, Richard snapped, adjusting the cuff of his expensive silk shirt. Because if it does, you're fired. There are plenty of women waiting to work here, women who know their place. His cold smile stung worse than his words. Kesha kept her eyes lowered as he walked back to his office filled with mahogany furniture and crystal decor. Richard Thornton, heir to a fortune built on shady government deals, saw his staff as disposable tools. And to him, anyone who didn't fit his narrow, privileged world had no worth. Devin, still laughing with his little toys, didn't notice the tension. Kesha crouched down beside him and whispered, Mommy will fix this, sweetheart. I promise. Richard had no idea who he was dealing with. Kesha Washington wasn't just a maid. She held a business degree and had once worked at a respected auditing firm before motherhood and heartbreak derailed her career. For the past 6 months, she had been quietly recording every insult, every racist remark, and every degrading comment in that house. As she scrubbed the master bathroom later that day, Kesha allowed herself a small smile. Richard thought he knew women like her. Soon, he would learn just how wrong he was. If you've ever been underestimated, keep watching, because the story of how a maid turned years of humiliation into powerful revenge is one you won't forget. From that day forward, every shift in Richard's mansion became a battle of the mind. He no longer just banned Devin from returning. He turned Kesha's daily work into a series of cruel tests. Kesha, get in here, he barked one Thursday morning. When she entered, Richard stood beside a luxury leather chair, pointing at a tiny stain. This wasn't here yesterday. Sir, I can check what product. I don't want excuses. Richard cut her off, adjusting his designer glasses. This chair costs more than your annual salary. Maybe your family situation is hurting your focus. Kesha clenched her fist behind her back. Family situation. That was his code for reminding her she was a single black mother. Richard went on, Some of my friends' wives tell me their maids are much more disciplined, women who know their priorities. What Richard never knew was that Kesha had grown up with a grandmother who spent 40 years as a domestic worker. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. He may try to break your pride, but he can never take your mind. Remember everything. Write it down. One day you'll use it. That week, Richard hosted a dinner for important clients. Kesha served silently, moving with grace while cleaning up after them. She overheard Richard chuckle to his guests. Finding truly dedicated help is impossible these days. Most of these people have other priorities. The guests laughed knowingly. Kesha kept pouring wine as though she hadn't heard. But inside, she was recording every word. Her patience finally cracked the next week. Richard had a Japanese investor visiting for lunch. As Kesha served the food, Richard said with a smirk, Apologies for the delay. You know how difficult it is to find competent staff when you're forced to hire from certain communities. Diversity rules and government nonsense. Sometimes we're stuck with lower standards. He spoke as if she were invisible, as if she didn't understand flawless English. The investor shifted uncomfortably, but Richard continued, At least this one is well trained. She knows her place. That was the final straw. Something inside Kesha shifted forever. This wasn't just about a paycheck anymore. It was about dignity, justice, and respect for every woman like her who endured daily humiliations from arrogant, entitled men. That night, in her small apartment, while Devin slept peacefully, Kesha opened her laptop. The same laptop she had once used during her 5 years as a financial analyst at Morrison & Associates, before her career was ruined by lies and corporate politics. She still had the documents from that time, proof that she had been punished for exposing fraud. And now, she realized those same skills would help her fight back against Richard Thornton. Kesha knew exactly how powerful men, like Richard, played the system to protect themselves. But this time, things would not go the way he expected. She began digging into Thornton properties, and within hours, the truth shocked her. Multi-million-dollar contracts with city governments where promised housing for low-income families had never been built. Suspiciously timed donations to politicians right before zoning approvals. Projects completed on paper but left unfinished in reality. Richard Thornton wasn't just a cruel rich man. He was a white-collar criminal making money by exploiting the very communities he despised. For 3 weeks, Kesha lived a double life. By day, she worked in silence. By night, after putting Devin to bed, she investigated. She placed a hidden recording app on her phone and began collecting proof of every racist insult and every shady business call she overheard. One Friday afternoon, as she dusted his office, Richard spoke on the phone. Those people never understand opportunity. We give them subsidized housing, and they still complain about quality. The ungratefulness is amazing. Kesha kept wiping the furniture as if she hadn't heard, but her apron pocket held the tiny recorder capturing every poisonous word. The turning point came during lunch with Richard's sister, Victoria. She was married to a senator, and even more arrogant than her brother. "Richard, do you really need to keep that maid?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "I know people who can recommend someone more suitable." Richard raised an eyebrow. "And why is that?" "You know how these people are. First, they bring their children. Then, half the neighborhood shows up. It's only a matter of time before she feels too comfortable." Richard laughed. "You're probably right. Maybe it's time for a change." At that moment, Kesha realized no amount of hard work or respect would ever protect her. To people like Richard and Victoria, she would always be those people. Disposable, replaceable, less than. But what they didn't know was that she was documenting everything, just like she once did when she exposed $15 million in fraud at her old job. Each insult only fueled her determination. She wasn't just angry. She had the skills and knowledge they would never expect from a maid. By mid-August, Richard's cruelty escalated. One day, he invited 3 businessmen to his office and, in front of them, called Kesha in to serve coffee. "Gentlemen," Richard said dramatically, "let me show you an example of work standards across different communities." He pointed to her while she silently poured their drinks. "Kesha has been with me for 3 years. She's obedient, yes, but naturally limited by her background. And that, gentlemen, is why our housing projects succeed. We know exactly the level we're working with." The men shifted uncomfortably, but Richard smirked on. Kesha pretended not to hear, but her recorder caught every word. This was the 17th piece of evidence in her growing collection. That same night, she shared the transcripts on a video call with David Chun, her former boss from Morrison and Associates. "Kesha," David said after reading, "do you realize how many federal laws this man has broken just in today's meeting? Racial discrimination, hostile work environment, possible civil rights violations." "It's not just about me, David," she said firmly. "It's about the fraud. I've been gathering documents from his office. Look at this." She shared her screen, revealing photos of files she had secretly taken. Government contracts worth millions for affordable housing, where less than half the units were actually built. David whistled low. "This isn't just misconduct. This is massive embezzlement of federal funds. Kesha, you're holding enough evidence to put this man behind bars for decades." "I know," she replied. "The question is, how do we use it so he can never hurt anyone again?" Together, they built a devastating case. By day, Kesha endured Richard's orders. By night, she prepared for justice. Richard, blind to her plans, saw her quietness as proof of her submission. On a Friday morning, he called down from his grand staircase while she scrubbed the hall. "Kesha, I need you to understand something about hierarchy. Some of the maids here are starting to complain about wages and conditions. I hope you're not being influenced by these dangerous ideas." "No, sir," she said evenly. "I know exactly where I stand." Richard smiled smugly. "Good, because Monday, I have an important meeting with federal investors about our housing projects. Everything must be perfect. No distractions. No children. No problems. Understood?" "Perfectly, Mr. Thornton." He walked away satisfied, never noticing the fire in her eyes. To him, her words sounded obedient, but to Kesha Washington, they were a promise. That night, she dialed a number that would change everything. Federal Prosecutor's Office, Financial Crimes Division, Prosecutor Janet Williams speaking. Kesha steadied her voice. "Prosecutor Williams, my name is Kesha Washington. I have proof of federal fraud in housing contracts," Kesha said firmly over the phone. "I think you'll want to see it." On the other end, Prosecutor Janet Williams fell silent. Then she asked, "Ms. Washington, when can you come to my office?" "Monday afternoon works," Kesha replied. "But there's something important you should know. Thornton is holding a meeting with federal investors Monday morning. If we're going to catch him red-handed, that's the time." A pause, then Janet asked, "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," Kesha said calmly, "that we give Richard Thornton the kind of meeting he never expected." All weekend, Kesha prepared. She arranged for a substitute nanny to watch Devin, reviewed every recording, every document, and every spreadsheet she collected. Her skills in finance, skills Richard never cared to notice, were finally going to be used against him. On Sunday night, she kissed her son's forehead. "Mommy's going to work tomorrow, sweetheart. But after tomorrow, everything will change." Devin babbled in response, his bright eyes shining as if he understood. Across town, Richard polished his presentation. He expected another day of victories, more millions in his pocket. He had no idea that his maid was working with prosecutors, auditors, and journalists to turn his meeting into his downfall. Monday morning dawned bright and clear. Richard, dressed in his best Armani suit, straightened his silk tie, and whispered to the mirror, "Today will be historic. Another 50 million. At 7:30 sharp, Kesha entered through the back door. "The meeting starts at 10, Richard told her coldly. "Coffee served at 9:45. "And Kesha," he paused, smirking, "behave. These are important men." "Of course, Mr. Thornton. I know exactly how to behave," she said evenly. Something in her tone made him glance up, but she was already walking away. At 9:40, the investors arrived. Thomas Bradley from the Federal Housing Department, Director Peterson from the Urban Development Agency, and a tall black man Richard didn't recognize, who introduced himself only as Consultant Washington from the Justice Department. Richard's smile widened. "Gentlemen, welcome to Thornton Properties. I'm confident you'll be impressed." Peterson's polite grin hid something Richard couldn't see. As Kesha moved silently with her tray of coffee, Richard launched into his slides. Thornton Properties delivers housing project on time and under budget, always. Consultant Washington flipped through some papers. "Mr. Thornton, one question. Records show you were paid $5 million to build 200 units in Green Valley, but only 80 units exist. Can you explain?" Richard's smile tightened. Yes. There were technical adjustments. Quality over quantity, you understand." "Technical adjustments," Peterson repeated slowly, scribbling in his notes. At that moment, Kesha stepped forward and laid a thick folder on the table. "You asked me to bring these additional documents," she said calmly, addressing Consultant Washington. Richard frowned. "What documents?" "I didn't. I believe these will clear up some misunderstandings," Consultant Washington cut in, opening the folder. Inside were copies of Richard's own emails about cutting corners and pocketing funds, spreadsheets showing luxury cars, vacations, and mansion renovations paid with stolen money. Richard's face went pale. "What? How did you—" "Mr. Thornton," Bradley said coldly, "allow me to reintroduce our colleague. This is Federal Prosecutor Marcus Washington, Financial Crimes Division. And the woman serving coffee? That is Senior Analyst Kesha Washington, Lead Consultant on Housing Fraud." The room seemed to collapse around Richard. He stared at Kesha, the maid he had mocked, insulted, humiliated for years. For the first time, he saw who she really was. Kesha Washington, he muttered in disbelief. She took off her apron, revealing a blazer underneath. Surprise, Richard? Or may I call you Richard, after all the time we spent together? He tried to rise, but Peterson held up a hand. Sit down, Mr. Thornton. You have the right to remain silent. Wait. Richard stammered. This is a mistake. Kesha, whoever you are, we can work something out. You know I've always respected you. Kesha laughed. A sharp, clean sound, the first in 3 years inside that mansion. Respected me? Marcus, do you want to hear how your respected businessman really spoke to me? She pulled out her phone and pressed play. Richard's voice filled the room. Those people never understand opportunity. We give them housing, and they still complain. Some people are just ungrateful. The recording was clear, undeniable, and it was just one of 23 files she had collected, documenting years of racism and abuse. My God, Bradley whispered. You really said that? It's out of context. Richard stuttered desperately, but everyone in the room knew the truth. Kesha slid another document across the table. What excuse do you have for telling your sister that people like me always need to be reminded of their place? Richard's eyes darted around the room, panic rising. The three men stared back at him with a mix of disgust and icy professionalism. His career, his reputation, his entire life was falling apart right in front of him. Kesha, for God's sake, think about what you're doing, he begged. Work with me. We can make a deal. A deal? Kesha leaned closer. Like the one you made with the Green Valley families? You promised them safe homes, but gave them leaking shacks, freezing winters without heat, and no proper safety systems. Marcus Washington calmly set handcuffs on the table. Richard Thornton, you are under arrest for federal fraud, embezzlement of public funds, racial discrimination, and civil rights violations. You can't do this to me. Richard shouted. Do you know who I am? My family has ruled the city for 4 generations. Kesha packed her documents neatly. Oh, I know exactly who you are. That's why I've kept records of every crime, every racist remark, and every dirty scheme for 3 years. Because men like you always think you're untouchable. Richard made one last desperate attempt. Kesha, you have a son. Think of him. If you go through with this, you'll ruin your own career. No one will ever hire you again. Kesha smiled, this time with pure relief. My real career is only beginning. I've just been promoted to Director of Housing Investigations. My first job is to make sure every dollar you stole goes back to the communities you robbed. Richard's face turned ghostly white. Director? You've always been. A financial analyst, Kesha finished for him, specializing in corporate fraud. Every day in your house, every insult, every humiliation, it all helped me build the strongest case against housing corruption in decades. Marcus snapped the cuffs on Richard's wrists. Richard Thornton, you're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Though from what I hear, staying silent hasn't been your strength. Richard's jaw dropped as he glanced between Marcus and Kesha. Sister? He muttered in disbelief. Kesha nodded. That's right. And Marcus has been listening to my recordings at every family dinner for years. Dragged away in handcuffs, Richard screamed, This is a setup, a conspiracy. You can't do this to me. Kesha simply watched through the window as the federal car rolled down the long driveway. After 3 years of humiliation, the moment of justice had finally arrived. But she knew this was just the beginning. 3 months later, the evening news shocked everyone. Former cleaning lady becomes federal director, recovers $50 million in stolen housing funds. Wearing a sharp navy blazer, Kesha walked the halls of the housing department with confidence. In her hands was a thick report showing how Richard scams had hurt over 2,000 families across 5 states. Director Washington, said James Morrison, the auditor Richard once fooled, your evidence exposed more than just Thornton Properties. This is a full network of corruption. How many are indicted so far? Kesha asked, glancing at a photo of Devin on her desk. 1 businessman, 3 politicians, and 2 judges. Your recordings cracked open a 20-year conspiracy. Meanwhile, Richard sat in a minimum security prison, sentenced to 12 years. His wealth was seized, his company destroyed, and even his sister abandoned him to save her political career. When he got a visitor, he expected a lawyer, but it was David Chun, the analyst who helped Kesha. "I brought you the news," David said, sliding over a newspaper. The front page showed Kesha receiving a medal from the Secretary of Housing. She recovered $47 million and turned it into real housing for poor families. Richard read in disbelief as David added, "She even started a scholarship fund. Kids from struggling communities can now study law and business at Richard Thornton University of Social Justice. She thought it was only fitting your name would teach the very people you despised." At the opening ceremony of the first new housing project, Kesha held little Devin, now 3, as families cheered. "Mommy, are you a hero?" he asked. "Mommy just did what was right," she said gently. "And sometimes we have to be patient and smart to see justice done." Margaret Thompson, who once lost her home to Richard's schemes, hugged her with tears in her eyes. "My children finally have a safe place to live. Thank you, Mrs. Washington." "You don't need to thank me," Kesha replied. "Thank your own strength for never giving up." Nearby, Rosa Martinez, who had lost everything to Richard, clutched the keys to her new home. "I knew God wouldn't forget us," she whispered. "I just never expected him to send a warrior like Kesha." 6 months later, Kesha's story was taught at universities nationwide. Her patience, detailed records, and clever use of the law became a model for fighting systemic injustice. Richard, meanwhile, learned that the real prison wasn't the cell, but the knowledge that the woman he had humiliated built a legacy of justice on the ruins of his empire. Devin, now thriving in a good school, carried the pride of having a hero for a mother. He grew up knowing that intelligence and determination will always defeat arrogance and hate. Because the best revenge is success, success so bright, your enemies never see it coming. So when someone tries to belittle you for your color, your background, or your status, remember, they might control the present, but you control the future.